So I want to dedicate this class Le'ilui Nishmas Avraham ben Ephraim, Abe Wiseman, a person who passed away on this Hebrew date in 1979. So it has been a while. And as a man I never really knew, but he created a legacy, which is the theme we're going to talk about tonight, which benefits children in Hebrew Day School and many other places on a continuous basis. Really, his wife created the legacy on behalf of him and herself. But I was struck by that because I saw an ad, which really was surprising to me, and I guess you're seeing it inside out, I'm not sure. But the ad is from Bank of America, and it says, "Will your great-great-grandkids know your name?" And something, I guess, I mean, it's talking about philanthropy ultimately, but it's something very crass about the idea that, well, if I leave them a few shekels and they wake up in the morning and they say, well, here's $100 from my great-great-grandfather. Say, oh, what was his name? Oh, well, he must have been okay, thank you. And that's a pretty pathetic thing to think about. And it just reminds me of a story, which I'll just tell very quickly, which is not directly related to the topic tonight, but it's tangential to it. It's recorded that in 1954, David Ben-Gurion came to America to seek out weapons and support from the United States, probably just general support, and he was not very successful. And he met John Foster Dulles, and John Foster Dulles challenged David Ben-Gurion and said, who do you think you represent? After all, you know, how many Jews really live in Israel? Do you think you represent the Jews of Poland? Do you think you represent the Jews of Russia, of Yemen, of Morocco, of Brazil? Who are you kidding? So David Ben-Gurion is reputed to have responded and said to him, well, who do you represent? After all, it's only been 300 years since the Mayflower landed in Plymouth Rock. And I would challenge you to name the captain of the ship, when it landed, how it crossed the sea. And he says, here, the Jewish people, as spread out as they are, if you stop 10 Jewish children as you travel around the world representing the United States, and you ask them about the Jewish people leaving Egypt, they could tell you what they ate and how long it took them to get there. And they could tell you so much information that's 3,000 years old, because in fact, the Jewish people were one people connected to one another. That's what how he replied to John Foster Dulles, who was never really known as a great sympathizer to the creation of the state of Israel or to the America becoming involved with Israel. What does it mean for us? So I want to start off this class by reminding all of us that in Bereshit, in Genesis, chapter 18, sentence 19, it's on page 82, 83 in the Stone Chumash, God says, Ki yadativ, I know about Abraham, and Rashi translates the word know here to mean love. I am close to Abraham because he projects forward to his children and to his household and to the future course of his family, how to act with tzedakah or mishpat, the two of the hallmarks of the Jewish people. Tzedakah means being sensitive to the needs of others, and mishpat means doing things honestly and fairly and correctly. And there's an interplay between the two. Strict compassion can infringe on justice, and strict justice can certainly infringe on compassionate caring for others. But ultimately, God says, what I love about Abraham is that he is creating a spiritual legacy which will continue. Now, what does that mean? And you can even ask, of all the people that Abraham and Sarah brought into belief in God, how many of them survived? Where are they today? In the end of the day, it was through Isaac and Rebekah and through Jacob and his wives and through the 12 tribes that the Jewish people were perpetuated and that belief in one God took hold in the world. But it was clear that, in other words, this is what mattered most to Avraham, acting with tzedakah and acting with mishpat, and in combining the two. And that's why the very next conversation in the Torah after that is Abraham questioning God specifically about how he's judging the terrible place of Sodom and why God is going to destroy them. Discussion for another time. But what's clear, what we need to realize is the bedrock of the Jewish people is us being able to carry forward what's most dear and what's most important to us into the future. And as we look at Parshat Pinchas, I think we can see that theme coming up over and over and over and over again. We're only going to deal with a slice of it tonight. But just by way of summary, Parshat Pinchas begins unusually with like a tag onto the previous week's Torah reading, which detailed how there was a plague in the Jewish people because the people were sinning. Men were consorting with the daughters of Moab, which was leading them to worship idols, and a plague broke out in the community, and 24,000 Jewish people died. And Pinchas, as an individual, took it upon himself to take action when the leader of one tribe was consorting with a Midianite woman. He killed them both in front of everybody, and he ended the plague. That's last week's Torah reading. And then this week's Torah reading picks up with the idea. Hashem spoke to Moshe saying God had to make an announcement, so to speak, and make sure it was passed on to the rest of the Jewish people. Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron, the Kohen, turned back my wrath from upon the children of Israel when he zealously took vengeance. Therefore, behold, I give him my covenant of peace. We're going to come back to this. The next section has to do with Moshe and Elazar the Kohen, because Aaron's already passed away, counting the Jewish people. And counting proactively with the idea that these will be the number of people who are about to enter the land of Canaan and fulfill the mandate of the Jewish people to come out of Egypt, the promise that was made to Abraham, and to come into the land of Canaan and to conquer it. Then we have Selofchod's daughters coming up, and they file a claim with Moshe. And their claim really is, what's going to be with our legacy? Our father died. We've discussed this in the past, the details. And we're daughters only. And unless we're given inheritance, we're not going to have a legacy of continuity together with the Jews entering the land of Canaan and conquering it, because our father's descendants will have no rightful place in the land. Next, God, sort of out of the blue, tells Moshe about his impending death, even though it doesn't really belong in this week's Parsha. And that provokes Moshe to say right away, I need a successor. Let's appoint a successor. And Yoshua is appointed as a successor. And again, what does it mean to appoint a successor? What it means is it means to see to it that there's continuity to the leadership of the Jewish people, as Moshe himself says, and we are going to look at this in more depth. As Moshe himself says, we can't have a people that are scattered like sheep on the hillside without any sense of continuity of leadership. And we're going to talk for a few minutes about the style of Moshe's leadership. But Moshe cries that out. And then Moshe thought, okay, Yoshua, who's most connected to you on a personal basis, he's going to become the leader. We'll look at those sentences a little bit more. And then the Parsha concludes with the discussion of the offerings in the Beit HaMikdash on the different holidays. That's an overview of what the Parsha of Pinchas is. It's a fairly long Parsha in terms of the numbers of sentences because of all the detailing of all the different offerings that take place on the different holidays. Let's get back to the beginning here. This idea of God appearing after the fact, after the plague ends, after Pinchas has interceded and thwarted the plot to undo the morality of the Jewish people and ended the plague that killed 24,000 people. God has a pronouncement to make. And he says, Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron, give him the credit for ending this plague, and I bestow upon him an eternal covenant of peace. And for eternity, the descendants of Pinchas, who otherwise would not have been Kohanim, for a technical reason, he creates through his action a legacy that goes on through time, that his descendants take upon themselves the mantle of Aaron, who was his grandfather, but because he was born after Aaron and his sons, he was born before Aaron and his sons were appointed as the Kohanim, he would not have become a Kohen. And yet that's bestowed upon him and his children for generations, again, talking about a legacy carrying forward. Now, there's a technicality here that Rashi goes to, and Rashi says, people challenged the actions of Pinchas as being insincere, and I think that's the best way to understand it. They mocked him. They said, look at the audacity of a person like Pinchas, whose father is Elazar, who married a daughter of Yitro, when we know Yitro himself was a person who worshiped idols. Yitro was a person outside the Jewish people. Look at the chutzpah, look at the insincerity of such a person with such a maternal lineage standing up and taking upon himself to kill one of the leaders of the Jewish people. So God, hearing this and realizing that unless this is clarified once and for all, there'll be a fundamental misunderstanding about the legacy that Pinchas created through his sincere, selfless action. God has to intervene and say, no, this is Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron, the one who pursues peace, who seeks out peace, the one who respects more so than anyone and values each and every individual Jewish person who's part of the Jewish people. After all, Aaron once a year enters the Holy of Holies, and Elazar has his son and the Kohen Gadol after him, to seek atonement on behalf of the Jewish people. First atonement for himself and his family, then atonement for his community, and then atonement for each and every Jewish person. The actions that Pinchas took, which could easily be construed as based in the outsider status of his mother's ancestors, and maybe based on what we could call the dark side of his character, is dispelled by God intervening and announcing, don't make a mistake here. Everything that Pinchas did on behalf of the Jewish people was rooted in the Aaron side of his personal legacy. Because what Aaron represented in loving every Jew and bringing peace amongst each person and valuing and building up marriages and solving all the interpersonal problems of the Jewish people shows that, yes, Pinchas' action was killing a leader of the tribe of the Jewish people, but he did so only to bring about peace, to restore harmony, to protect the honor of Hashem. And every aspect and every fiber of his being that took this action was drawing upon the spiritual legacy of his grandfather Aaron, who everyone knew as a lover of peace and a pursuer of peace, and a person who was totally devoted to drawing his fellow Jew closer and closer to God. So don't think it derived from any weakness or lack of clarity on his part, a clouding of values, or from some spiritual DNA within him which could have gone back to the practices of idolatry. God intercedes and says, don't make that mistake. This was the pure spiritual legacy of Aaron, playing itself out in the actions of Pinchas. And when you see that happen, you can be sure that that's going to be a spiritual legacy that will continue generation after generation after generation until the end of time. And that's what God is making clear here, which of course should provoke for us the reflexive thought here. What are we doing to examine the source of our actions, even good actions, even actions that have good outcomes, but to clarify what we're drawing upon, where it comes from? And I'll tell you something very parenthetical here, which this is out of school, but I'll mention it anyway. I heard a very wise person ask the question recently, said, by and large, people don't see medical doctors as the kindest people in the world. Why should that be? Because the whole act of healing is an act of kindness. It's an act of interceding to improve someone else's life and make it better. And don't we know that a mitzvah takes root within a person and brings out more goodness and reinforces the goodness? So why don't we see medical doctors as being the kind of person who's running down the street because somebody dropped their wallet to make sure it gets returned? It says we don't necessarily see that in spite of all the good that they do. And the person explained, because the actions themselves, the clinical mind, which is trained to look at a person in chemical, biological terms, which is what's necessary to heal a person. I'm not putting it down. I'm not indicting science or the medical profession here. That itself breeds a certain sense of decisive, what we would call achzoria, that decisiveness, which says, this leg has to come off. This person needs surgery. Yes, it's going to take a year to recover from it. Yes, there's going to be a lot of pain and suffering involved, but I'm stepping forward to take that action on his behalf. And yes, the underpinnings of it are altruistic and based on healing and based on an act of kindness. But because it draws on so many different aspects of a person's personality and being, it doesn't translate itself into the glowing, giving, loving personality. Oftentimes does not translate into that because of the other aspects of human nature that are being drawn on at the same time. So what does that mean? I'm hoping it means that to the extent that a person really seeks to emphasize what we call here the light side, the peaceful side, when a person reaches into their own spiritual toolbox and says, I want to be a student of Aaron more than anything else. And I want my children and my grandchildren to be kindly, to be concerned. The same way Abraham rooted the Jewish people in this vision. And the same way Abraham was troubled by the possibility of God destroying the city of Sodom without there being calibrated justice there. So we need to have that kind of refinement, that kind of questioning of ourselves, that kind of emphasis within ourselves. And yeah, sometimes there's such a thing as tough love, you know, and parents need to have their kids vaccinated, even though the kid cries in the doctor's office. And parents need to discipline their children as well as simply to love them, because discipline also can convey love, especially when it's done without anger, especially when it's done not to create, not wanting your kid to be afraid of you, especially when it's being done not to demand obedience, but rather because I want to build this child into being a great person. Pinchas wanted to rectify the honor of God within the Jewish people, and that's so that there would be peace and harmony amongst the Jewish people and between the Jewish people and God. And that's what he drew upon in taking his action. Avraham, in his every endeavor, drew upon an ever deepening understanding and an effort to bring to practice tzedakah and mishpat. The two have to go together. One has to be based on the other. We could talk about the counting of the Jewish people. We could talk about the daughters of Tzlavcha. We could talk about the fact that Moshe, in such a selfless way, tells God, name a successor leader for the Jewish people without personal consideration, and knowing and understanding that it wouldn't be one of his own children who would be the leader of the Jewish people. Well, let's rather take a look at the manner in which Moshe asks for a successor leader and the way that plays out. And that is, sorry, I thought I wrote that down. Page 888, 889 in the Stone Chumash. It's chapter 27. Again, if you look from the top of that page 12, Hashem says to God, to Moshe, go up to the mountain of Avarim. And the word Avarim, by the way, itself means to pass forward, to pass on. So the very mountain in which Moshe was going to leave this world on was the mountain which connoted the idea of passing forward the leadership of the Jewish people. You'll see the land, but you're not going to go there. And Moshe immediately says in sentence 15, may Hashem, God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over the assembly who shall go out before them and come in before them, who shall take them out and bring them in, and let the assembly of Hashem not be like sheep that have no shepherd. That's chapter 27, sentence 15. Hashem responds in sentence 18, take to yourself Yoshua bin Nun, a man in whom there is spirit. So again, they're reflecting that word, and lean your hands upon him. What is this idea of spirit, and what's the idea of Moshe himself referring to God as Elokei Haruchot L'chol Basar, a specific way of referring to God, which is translated here in the English, God of the spirits of all flesh. So Rashi answers that question for us very clearly. And Rashi says that what Moshe understood and the manner in which he addressed God is he said, you are Elokei Haruchot L'chol Davar, you are the God of the spirit of each person, which Rashi translates as, you know the mind, the individuality of every person, and that they differ one from the other. Appoint a leader who will be able to cater to the needs of each individual according to his way of thinking. And then when God responds, Isha Asher Ruach Bo, Rashi continues, Yeshua does have the depth of character and ability to understand the souls of the different people of the nation. He satisfies your request for someone who will cater to each person according to his nature. Now, I recently was following a detailed discussion having to do with politics in the world today. And the spokesperson was coming to what he felt was a very exciting conclusion. And he said, we need leaders who can harness the anger of people and not leaders who play on the fears of people. It could sound very grand, but it sounded so demoralized to me. Because in this person's thinking, there's only two ways a leader can lead. A leader can lead by provoking anger. And I have to say, I saw this with my own two eyes, and this is not a political statement. But when there was a shooting on July 4th in Illinois, the governor of Illinois, Governor Pritzker, was widely seen on the news and saying, I hope you're angry, just like I'm angry. And I think this is what I'm hearing over and over again. You see, anyone who wants to advocate for a cause has to advocate from a point of anger, disgust, join me because we can't put up with this for another minute. And then this person was saying, oh, after all, I think anger is better than fear. And I guess fear in this mind was thinking about all the fear of the other, the fear of xenophobic fears, with all these different characterizations that we see people making of one another, that if you disagree on an issue, then you're afraid of losing your control, whatever. But we see here from the Torah, and I know so many people draw conclusions about leadership from the Torah, and some of them seem very not very well based in the text or in what the Torah is saying. This seems to me like something that's very clear. Moshe led the Jewish people through building each and every person to draw upon all the goodness that is within them. And this goes back to the idea of Moshe wanting to judge all the people himself. Because Moshe understood it, if two people come with an argument, it's not a question of just deciding, okay, he's right, you're wrong, pay him $50, you get the lost object, you don't get the lost object, your cow is at fault, and your cow is not at fault. Moshe understood that conflict brings out visceral emotions in people, and that if you're passing judgment, you could really do so much better if you're able to convey a sense of mishpat, a sense of tzedakah, a sense of connection within every ruling that you bring forward. So Moshe wasn't interested in acting out of anger, sitting on the bench and say, how dare you act in this way, which is an affront to our society. Moshe was interested in understanding each person, addressing that person in a way that would build that person towards the direction of strengthening all the goodness that was within that person and attaching that person directly back to the legacy of Avraham, which is the root of the Jewish people, which is la'asos tzedakah mishpat, that we have a deep commitment to acting with compassionate tzedakah and with clarity and justice at the same time. And that we can balance those two ideas in every aspect of our lives. And that can be the basis of my leadership. So if the Jewish people need to go to war, it's not out of anger and out of hatred, it's not out of fear, but it's out of making the world a better place and protecting the honor of Hashem in a way that will raise up everybody in the world. And these ideas become so basic here. This is what it means to create a legacy. And I dare say this is what it means to have an impact on future generations. When Bank of America wants to know, will your great-great-grandkids know your name? And again, as Ben Gurion pointed out to John Foster Dulles, that we know the names of many of the people who went out from Egypt. We know what they ate every day when they were journeying out toward the land of Israel. We know what crossing the sea was like for them. We know so much about them because they teach us and showed us in their manner of acting what it means to not act out of anger and not to act out of fear, but rather to act out of a legacy of tzedakah mishpat and acting in that manner in the world. And it sounds Pollyannish, but Moshe pinpointed that as the quality of God that the leader of the Jewish people should have within him. And I would assume that that's the same idea, the same concept that that this is how Moshe conducted his leadership as well. It goes back to the idea of Moshe being a shepherd. There's a medrash that says that one sheep ran away and Moshe pursued him and pursued him. That's how he ended up by the burning bush. But the idea being that one sheep mattered to Moshe, not at the expense of the other sheep, but that each and every individual mattered and counted and was noticed. And Moshe understood that if this is the flock that I'm taking care of, I have a connection and a responsibility to each and every member of the flock. And without that, no matter how much fear or obedience or anger you try to lead with, you're going to end up with sheep spread out on the mountainside where people don't have any real basis of connection to one another. They don't have any real shared values, and they don't have any legacy to carry forward to their children. The value system is not there. It just doesn't happen. And I would just add a thought to this. Who was Yeshua also? Yeshua was not the most brilliant student Moshe has, and I say this with all due respect to Yeshua, because it says when they listed even this Meraglim, the scouts going out to the land of Israel, he was listed 7th or 6th or something like that, because that's where he ranked in terms of his personal greatness. But what Yeshua represented is the person who clung most to Moshe's example, who wanted to learn from him, who wanted to understand Moshe to the best as his teacher, the best extent that he could, so that he could build within himself that real legacy. It would be like, to use the analogy I used before, if I saw someone as a great surgeon, so I can learn their technique of surgery from a manual, or they could write down the steps for me. But if I feel that the real greatness of the surgeon is expressed in the deep love and commitment he has to the health and well-being of his patient, and I want to absorb that as well, then I've got to be standing in the operating room, surgery after surgery after surgery, to see how that's expressed and to see how this person is drawing upon not just technical skills, but character skills, value skills that they're putting into action that really reach directly back to tzedakah mishpat, to this balance that the Jewish people is based on. So when we pick up the challenge of Bank of America and we say, will your great-great-grandkids know your name? Look, we know how many times have I met people in my life who have said, well, 4 generations ago, I'm a descendant of Rabbi Akiva Eger. And it's not because Rabbi Akiva Eger created a trust in Bank of America that this person is still benefiting from. But it's rather because Rabbi Akiva Eger, whoever that great descendant was, invested so heavily in integrating key values within themselves and demonstrating those values under even adverse circumstances. Someone like Pinchas can demonstrate being a lover of peace by putting a spear through the guts of 2 people, because that's what he was purely drawing upon. And certainly a physician who is out to heal can become an ever greater kind, gentle, loving person if he connects what he's doing directly to those values in everything that they're doing. And this is a big challenge for us. We all do a lot of good, and we all wonder sometimes why we are not better, why we don't reflect these values more. And that's the challenge of dealing with ourselves as an individual, dealing with our children as individuals. As teachers, we want to build the kids around certain values. We want to place those values, we want to draw them out from within them, and we want to emphasize them, and we want to compliment the kids for them, and we want to show them that these are values that will take them far in life. And we need to do the same thing with ourselves. And in doing so, we, in fact, create a spiritual legacy, so that I dare say, there's a lot of disruptions in Jewish history, and sometimes it's impossible to know a lot of facts about 2 generations, 3 generations, 4 generations ago. I was dealing with a very complex health survey, and given that the Holocaust took place, how old was this person when they died? What was their cause of death? Where did they die? So many unanswered questions. But yet I think those people really did create a legacy, even though it's anonymous at this point. but the values are not anonymous. The lifestyle is not anonymous. The teaching is not anonymous, because it goes back to, just like Ben-Gurion said, it goes back thousands of years. We know who Abraham was. We know who Yitzchak was. We know who Yaakov was. We knew what they stand for. If we pay close attention, we can see how they act in the world, and we can learn from that, and we can take it to heart, and we can connect back to that within ourselves. And then we, in doing so, will create what will prove to be a lasting spiritual legacy for our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren, so that even though they may not know our names, we will have a profound influence on how they live their lives. Any questions? Wish everybody well, and everybody should stay cool. You know, the world is heating up, they tell us, and hopefully we'll see each other next week. Have a good evening.
Thank you,
Thank
Rabbi.
you, you too. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.